by your kind introduction, David. I also just say this, I haven't said this before, I don't think, ever, but I do owe David and Jean Knapp a great debt of gratitude, really, because they were of a small number of people who placed their confidence in me as a politician in Brighton, and I sort of entered, I suppose, Brighton Labour politics with a rather strange track record and reputation as having led the Brighton and Hove Corporate Union. And Brighton Labour Party in the early 80s, you know, it didn't quite get sort of direct action and sort of extra parliamentary activity. And if you ever met a member of the militant tendency, they used to sort of fix you with this steely glare and sort of question whether you were, you know, fit to join the Labour Party. And it was almost like you had to go through a pre-application process. So signing David and Jean's form was only the first step that one could take to join the Labour Party in Brighton, and in particular Kemptown. And you know, it's a great delight to me this evening to see so many friends and comrades from back in the 80s. And I have always enjoyed being a member of our party locally. And I greatly regret, as many of you will know, the way in which over the last few years we have not been as successful as we were in the 70s, 80s and the early 90s. And, you know, I suppose because the Greens irritate me a great deal, I'm getting angrier, and I want to help make sure that we start to really take them on, as I think colleagues have been doing over the last few weeks and months. So I would like to just record my thanks to David and Jean in particular, and also add my warm congratulations to Pat Hawkes for her tireless efforts as a member of the local party and as a brilliant councillor, and just a great community bod, just a great person. And the Labour Party is as good as it is because people like Pat, Jean and David put in so much effort and commitment and care a lot about the communities and the people that they work with. And Pat deserves that merit award more than anybody I can think of. And, you know, she was a great supporter of mine, and I have to say I'm one of her biggest fans, and if I sound a bit sentimental and soppy, I am. But when Peter Carver sort of rang up and said, Steve, you know, we've got this dinner and we're struggling to find an after-dinner speaker, I sort of thought about it a bit. I sort of thought, oh, blimey, yeah, he wants me to come up with a big name. And it took me back, I have to tell you, to the time when I was asked to become a member of the House of Lords. And David and Ivor and Des had just been elected, and I was sat in my office in the old Local Government Association, and a message came onto my desk that somebody calling herself Sally Morgan wanted to speak to me from Downing Street. And I thought, it was a bit weird, you know, why would Downing Street want to speak to me? So after a few days of her trying and failing to get hold of me, I eventually rang the Downing Street switchboard, and rang her number. And Sally came on the line and she said to me, she said, we were wondering if you could help us with the House of Lords. And I thought about it, I thought, well, hold on a minute, you know, what do I know about the House of Lords? You know, I know nothing about the House of Lords. I said, well, you know, what sort of help do you need? And she said, well, you know, we wondered if you knew anybody who would like to be a member of the House of Lords. And I was being a bit thick, really. And I sort of said, well, no, not really, I don't mix in those circles. You know, I don't really know many tops. And she said, no, she said, silly. She said, we'd like you to join the House of Lords, and we'd like you to help us out. So anyway, I said, well, I'm not really keen on that. You know, the House of Lords not really my sort of thing. You know, I don't know about it. She said, well, there's this bloke called Dennis Carter, and he's the chief whip, and you have to go and see him. So I thought, well, this is an instruction. And I said, well, all right, I'll go and talk to the bloke, you know, and I'll have a chat with him. And he interviewed me, and it was like a job application actually. And he sort of said, what time do you get up in the morning? What time do you go to bed? What are your outside interests? Do you like football? Have you got any secrets that you think you ought to reveal to me now? And are there any strange things in your personal life? And at this point I thought, blimey, this is a bit weird. This is worse than applying to join the Masons. And so I answered these questions to the best of my ability. And I revealed all the horror stories that I could think of. A passion for Brighton Hove Albion Football Club. And at that point, I realised that I'd turned the corner. Because Dennis Carter had grown up in Hove. And he used to go and watch Brighton Hove Albion Football Club. And so, at this point, his face lightened up and he said, "Oh, right, Steve, you'll do." And so I phoned Sally Morgan up and I said, "Well, Dennis Carter said I'll do." And, I've talked to Jill, my partner, and she thinks it's a bit of a risky thing to be involved in. But, look, if you think I can help make up the number, I'll happily put my name forward to become a member of the House of Lords. And I thought as I put the phone down, I'm going to regret this. So now, here we are, nearly 15 years on. And I don't know that I regret it, but it has been one of life's enriching experiences. I made some notes earlier in the day, and I sort of thought, well, I could talk about being introduced to the House of Lords. So, being introduced to the House of Lords is really rather weird. When you're elected as an MP, it's all really rather straightforward, or at least it seems that way to me. But when you become a member of the House of Lords, you not only have to be interviewed by Dennis Carter, you have to go and see somebody called the Garter King at Arms. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the College of Arms. And you have to go to him to agree your title. Now, I didn't know any of this before, so off I go to see this really strange bloke in his wood-panelled room, somewhere tucked away off near the Thames. And he announced who he was and sort of ushered me into this room. And I kid you not, there were inkwells with quill pens in. And I thought, well, this is a bit weird. And he was in this sort of strange outfit with sort of garters and sort of stockings and things. And I thought, this is a very strange world that I'm entering into here. And he said, name? And I said, Bassam. Steve Bassam, from Brighton. Oh, very droll, yes, very droll. And I said, well, I've come to discuss my title with you. And he said, title, yes. Where do you live? Brighton. Brighton, yes. That's in Sussex, isn't it? Yes, East Sussex, actually. Oh, yes, can't have that. So, he said, I said to him, well, I was thinking that I might be called, Bassam of Brighton. That's all right. And he sort of said, yes, well, we haven't got any, the last two Brightons are dead. Yes, okay, that'll do. And that was it. So I became Baron Bassam of Brighton in the county of whatever it was, and so on. And the other strange thing that I had to do is I had to go and see Black Rod. Now, Black Rod is the person who you see on the telly, who sort of bangs this rod, this stick, against the door and summons the commoners to the House of Lords to listen to Her Majesty give the Queen's speech. And he's a very strange man as well. He wears these sort of same tights and gaiters and things. Anyway, I had to have an interview with him. But again, I thought this is really very, very strange indeed, because clearly I've got to pass some other test before I'm allowed into the House of Lords. And he decided to arrange a joint interview with this chap called George Simpson. Now, I can honestly say I've only seen him twice since. And he assumed that George Simpson was a Conservative. So all through this conversation, he was making sort of funny little jokes about political parties and how he expected Mr. Simpson would enjoy himself being in opposition to me, and we were now the government today. And this chap, George Simpson, was really rather puzzled about this. And I discovered after I left that George Simpson was at the time the chairman of GEC, one of the largest companies in the world at the point, before George Simpson subsequently rubbished the company. And I think that was why George Simpson never ever appeared in the House of Lords. And when he finally did, he didn't tell anybody he was turning up, which is very strange really when you think about it. Anyway, So that was Black Rod. And then you have to be introduced, and you have to find 2 sponsors. So you think about it, 2 sponsors. Who do you have as a sponsor? Well, you have to have another member of the House of Lords. So Joyce Gould was quite a good friend of mine by then. She and I collaborated on the famed expulsion of the militant tendency in Brighton, along with several others. And I thought I'd get Dennis Healy to do it, because Dennis had come over and played the piano for David in an election campaign, and I struck up something of a rapport with him. And the funny thing about Dennis was that well, it's not funny, he has a very, very, very good sense of humour, and those famous bushy eyebrows. But he's also, well, he's a very droll sort of character. And so my first introduction to the House of Lords, he was supposed to be very straight-faced and serious, was Joyce Gould there, and Dennis Healy there, and me in the middle. And as I entered the chamber of the House of the Lords, I could hear Dennis saying, "Enter the chamber of the living dead." And this was my way of introduction to my future. So the weird interview, the strange man with the funny garters looking like something out of a pack of cards, Black Rod, George Simpson, and then Dennis Healy. And I thought, well, I don't really think this is going to last, but it has. And I suppose the thing that struck me is that actually that the Lords is a very eccentric and weird place, and it's a strange place because you've got people there who come from very humble backgrounds, and then you've got people there with immense wealth like Lord Ashcroft, who owns Belize and has sort of offshore bank accounts and all those sorts of things that very rich people had. And it's also full of mad people. I mean, the one thing that struck me when we were expelling hereditaries after the 1999 reform was that we were actually doing the nation a service, because a lot of those people had done a lot of inbreeding before they got to the and they were deeply weird. Now, I used to stare across the chamber at one of them, a chap who I really didn't like very much, now sadly dead. I mean, he had a sense of humour, I suppose. But, we always prided ourselves in trying to be serious and proper and quite formal about things. And this bloke used to daily come into the chamber wearing these sort of waistcoats that were bright yellow and socks that were bright red, and this enormous bow tie. And then he'd accuse us of being football hooligans. And I just used to wonder about the Lord Onslow. And then he told me one time that one of his forebears had been executed for treason, and I sort of begun to get it. You sort of get like another bit after you meet people like that. And he was undoubtedly a hooligan himself. And then you come across people like Jeffrey Archer. Jeffrey Archer, clearly a fantasist. And I can remember during that period when he'd been endorsed by William Hague as the likely mayoral candidate for London, and then was subsequently found guilty for perjury and locked up. Now, I have to tell you that the House of Lords is full of people who eventually disappear. Now, they either disappear into jail, or they... No, it's true. I mean, there's been quite a few people locked up since I've been there. Now, I don't say that's because I'm there, but it's very interesting that the House of Lords definitely thins out when there's a bit of whiff of corruption in the air. And, Jeffrey Archer was one of them. There's Comrade Black, of course, he never quite made it. And then there was the other fantasist, Lord Taylor, recently. And there was another one, Hanningfield, he'd been locked up. The list grows a bit, and I have to say I'm partly grateful for the criminal legal process in this country, because at the moment you will have gathered that the Tories are rather keen in filling up the red benches with more of their own. Only this morning I read on Twitter sphere that they were thinking of putting another 60 coalition peers into the House of Lords. And I have to tell you, I think I might be partly to blame for that. Now, since the general election, There's only one of the two houses where the government consistently loses, and it's the House of Lords. Just last week, I was proudly standing in the contents lobby, shepherding through all these peers, and I looked over to my right and I could see that the Tory and Lib Dem lobby was empty. We had more going through ours than they did through theirs. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And we made a major hole in their ghastly welfare reform bills. So I take great pride in that, and I take great pride in the organisation in our office that manages to deliver occasionally 1 in every 7 divisions a defeat against the government. Because every defeat we manage to clock up means that their programme is disrupted, put out kilter, and deflected away from what they want to do to our country. And the House of Lords may be unelected, and I'm one of those who favours an elected second chamber. It may not fully represent our great nation. It may not reflect the wider population as it should. But it is, at the moment, I have to tell you, a bastion of reason and rationality by comparison with the nonsense that sometimes goes on in the House of Commons. And I never thought I'd make this speech,
yes,
but
indeed,
that is the case. And if I've learned something over the last 14 years, it is that wherever you are in the Labour Party, whatever you do, the key is effective organisation. And the key to effective organisation is to work closely with friends and colleagues to make sure that you understand each other and that you have well thought out strategies and targets against which you want to deliver to achieve our goal of a fairer, more equal, more prosperous, more egalitarian society which treats people with the respect that they deserve and are entitled to as part of our great world. And that's one of the things I try to bring to bear in the way in which we work in the House of Lords. And I take great pleasure in the mischief that we make, and I take great delight in using the Toffs House as a bulwark against political programmes and political ideas and ideologies that are there to undo the good work that we did over 13 years. So, you know, as I say, I speak with humility this evening, and I draw a lot of my inspiration from friends and colleagues who are in this room, and I have enjoyed greatly working amongst and with colleagues here too. Now my final thing is a quick rant, if you don't mind. Is that all right? Am I allowed a quick rant? Right, now look. As you well know, I am not very keen on the Green Party. And I have decided that I will dedicate at least 50% of my Twitter feed, that's Steve the Quip, and target it against the Greens in Brighton Hove City Council. So what I want to do this evening is to urge those of you who have got a phone that does it to start an open Twitter account. And I want you to dedicate 50% of your tweets against the Brighton Hove Green Party and Caroline Lucas, because that would be a solid and sensible use of your political time and energy. Agreed? Yes. Excellent. So that's why I'm on the communication thing today. And this, look, finally, on the Greens. They may look and sound and feel nice. They may have members who are a bit like us. They may even have some ideas that are a bit like our ideas, actually. But actually, last year they campaigned in our city against cuts and against privatisation, fair enough. And the people in our city believed them. And they believed them in sufficient numbers that they became the council and took over control from the Tories. I thought we would get something better. I actually genuinely thought we would get something better than what was there before. And although it's replaced Mary Mears, nasty, bossy person, unpleasant, conniving, some people will go further and say corrupt, I won't go that far.
No, you better not do that.
I do not think that the current administration of our city council is doing our city any favours. This is a great city. We, in the Labour movement, made it a great city. We built the place, we generated the ideas, we had the vision, we had the ideas and the imagination. We now have to make sure that the next generation of those involved in the Labour Party does exactly the same. And to do that, we have to get rid of the roadblock. The roadblock are currently the Green Party. They are cutting our services. Their cuts are hurting the poorest, most deprived, most vulnerable people in our community. And we should be bloody angry about that. And we should campaign tirelessly to get rid of them. Because they are not a progressive political party. And as much as Jason Kitcutt and Caroline Lucas say that actually it's the government's fault, they are doing their dirty work. If you've got one thing to take from this evening, from me as somebody who's on a bit of a rant, go out there, campaign against them, make sure that we get our councillors back in 2015, and that we take back that Caroline Lucas's seat and declare it as our own. Comrades, it's up to you. Thank you very much.